My name is Christos Hadjiyiannis, and this is my true story.
Hey guys, it's me Ksenia, and today we're having Christos Hadjiyiannis, lecturer in English literature and an academic writer. He's also my friend, he's also doing business development for business school, right?
Right, yes.
Why we're having Christos today? Because he's great, we are just interested in people who are doing something awesome professionally, and we would like to know more about it, Christos.
Thank you, Ksenia, for having me here.
So Christos, you're doing so many things. You're teaching, you're writing, this and that. What is your favorite thing to do?
Probably tennis. Playing tennis in the morning. Other than that, I like reading. I like writing. Conversation.
Conversation with whom?
Conversation with whom? That's a good question. I love our book club.
Yeah, we do have a book club.
We have a book club. You should all join. I think conversations over something are always really nice. Conversations over food or over books or over after watching a film. I think it's something that probably anchors one in a topic, but at the same time it sort of multiplies. And I guess this is what I love about teaching as well. Conversations with my students, or eavesdropping as well, overhearing people talking about other things.
Good. And then teaching. Is there something, do you feel like you are bringing value when you're teaching? I mean, is there...
Of course not.
No? But do you?
Bringing value to...
I'm wondering why people are choosing these jobs, teaching. I tried teaching English to kids years ago, and I figured that it's not my thing 100%. I need to talk a lot. It was very, very difficult for me.
Yeah. I mean, I've got so much respect for teachers. More than respect, admiration. It also seems to me crazy that someone would choose that as a profession, because it requires so much work. It's underpaid, despite what many people say about it. But I think it shows a kind of dedication that not all university lecturers have. I love teaching for various reasons. I love it because I learn a lot, because I think I can help, because often I'll finish a class and I'll walk away, and the idea that somebody is paying me to do that seems to me crazy. Not paying us very much, but there's someone rewarding me for doing something that feels such a privilege and luxury to do. That's on a good day. Of course, there are days when you're not entirely sure what it is that you're trying to do. But I think most academics go into this because they love literature and because they love to do research and to exist within a discourse and a community that allows them to live the intellectual life as much as possible, and then teaching is part of it. I suspect many academics don't enjoy teaching. I know I have heard of some people who would prefer to do research and be on extended research leaves than teach. But there are also many great teachers within academia. But I think the biggest respect should go to primary school and secondary school teachers, and kindergarten, of course. They're the ones who are really the heroes.
But getting back to you, why are you doing this?
I don't think there's a kind of noble reason behind it. It's pure hedonism. I love it. I don't, unlike many other people, I don't think I had options, and I still have options, but it was I'm unimaginative when it comes to doing anything other than read, write, talk about literature. That is what I want to do, and as long as I have the opportunity to do it, I'll do it.
All right. And then we also discussed before, you told us that you chose it because you wanted to be an intellectual.
Of course, yeah.
And there was a little bit of like a faking
little bit.
in it. Are you still faking being intellectual, or how does it?
The fact that you asked me that question suggests to me that, yes, I think I am, look at me, I usually walk around with a book in case, a photographer shows up. I don't want them to think that I'm not studious or intelligent. There is, and I think intellectuals who take themselves too seriously probably fail to see the performance of it. The question is, what does an intellectual do? Exactly. And maybe do is the wrong verb. I think intellectual is someone who has time. So already that comes with a huge privilege. Not many people have time. People have to work. People have to take care of children and elderly relatives and their lives and their health. So even faking it, yes. So I am maybe faking it a little bit, but I think it comes with the job.
Or maybe faking it is actually part of being an intellectual.
True, or definitely thinking about what it means to fake it is part of the kind of like self-reflective meta questions that intellectuals ask.
Yeah. And Christos, you wrote a couple of books. Can you tell us something about them?
Of course, I thought you'd never ask. I wrote one book and edited a second book, which has just come out, and I'm working on a little book. My first book is called Conservative Modernists, and it tells the story of this group of poets, all living in London at around the turn of the century, turn of the 20th century, and they were all experimenting, writing crazy poetry. Right? So they would write poetry that is fragmented, that seems open, a bit chaotic. Because the most famous example of such a poet is T.S. Eliot, who wrote and published in 1922 this rich and really unstructured, yet also very beautiful poem called The Wasteland. Yet, here's the twist, in their politics were very conservative. So they, many of them supported the monarchy, they were very suspicious of democracy, they were very suspicious of the working classes and sort of like the petty bourgeoisie, suspicious that they were trying to become part of the establishment in ways that were not warranted. So they were snobs, they were elites. They were not very nice people when it came to their politics. So I guess the question that interested me is, how can one write poetry that is experimental and anarchic, yet in their politics be reactionary and conservative? You'll have to read the book to find out.
Obviously.
Yes. The second book sort of continued in that vein. It's a book I co-edited with Rachel Potter, and it's called The Cambridge Companion to 20th Century Literature and Politics, and tells a story from liberalism in the 1900s to neoliberalism in the early 2000s, of how literature responded to key political events, how literature took an active role, and also how literature stayed away from politics. Mm-hmm. And the book I'm working on now is short. It should not be short because the subject is so broad and almost impossible to capture. And the subject is suffering. So I guess the question I'm trying to think through is, why is poetry interested in suffering? What is it that connects poetry, I guess art in general, to pain and suffering.
That's deep.
That is deep. It's who I am. It's the kind of job I do.
Yeah, it's very interesting. People reading poetry, I think that not many people do it nowadays. It's, again, this is just a gut feeling. I'm sure there is research on that. I think people read less and less of poetry.
Yeah.
Do you? Yeah, you.
Yeah, I think empirically,
why do you think is it?
I don't have data, but I think it's fair. It's a fair observation. I think more people will have on their more people will be reading fiction novels in public transport, on the plane, before they go to bed than they would be reading poetry.
And then
and
also,
I think that's a shame.
Maybe it's a shame. I also think that a lot of people, again, this is just my observation, no data here, but a lot of people who did not read before, they started reading and they are reading non-fiction, self-help, successful success, kind of books. Yeah.
True. Yes, I think there's a lot of like self-help, and there's also great non-fiction. There's always been very good non-fiction, but I think now there's really, really great non-fiction. So maybe people are reading that, and I guess the interesting thing is that people are turning to books for advice and for insights. This is why I go to poetry. So in many ways, maybe this hasn't changed, to turn to books for
what kind of
help.
What kind of advice can it give? We just discussed that there is a lot of suffering in poetry.
Poetry,
so
what kind of advice? There's so many, there's so much advice that one can get from poems. Wisdom. There's a kind of like collective intelligence, because poetry is in conversation with poetry of the past and of the present, and maybe of the future if we follow T.S. Eliot's line of thinking. But a poem always condenses wisdom, whether it's inherited wisdom, whether it's wisdom that's being fought for through anguish and personal experience, whether it condenses wisdom that we get through other books, other poems. There's a lightness that I think is to be found in many poems, like moments of epiphany, where a kind of like light appears and suddenly something makes sense. So maybe advice is the wrong word. Maybe what I find in poetry and what draws me to poetry is that it allows me to process things, including things that I did not know that needed processing. So I think there is a lot to be said about spending time with a poem, and it doesn't need to be very long. What I love also about poetry is that a lot of it is very short. It's a kind of thing that you can just go in, read a poem. It takes like 3 minutes, and then get out, and on you go and do other stuff.
So maybe we are to expect renaissance of poetry on TikTok.
I think, I hear that thing exists. There's definitely Twitter poetry.
Everything exists.
Everything exists. I feel like 100 years old. This TikTok you talk about, tiktok.com. I should check it out. I know that there is this thing called Twitter poetry. And there's a poet who started off from Twitter, and I think she's called Rupi Kaur. Her poetry is not very good, but I think Twitter probably lends itself to short form poetry. I don't know about TikTok. What's TikTok poetry?
I've always been a fast texter. Maybe it's because I'm always on my phone, or maybe it's just because I know the way some days I feel incredibly alone.
Are you a believer of the fact, it's not the fact, but when someone is writing the poetry, is it channeled into the writer, the poet, from God, or from universe? This question, is it coming from, these people who are, like walking, and then these stories, I was walking and then I started feeling these lines like getting into my head, and I, like rushed home to write them down.
Yeah.
Is it true? Has it ever happened to you?
It's not. I mean, I don't write poetry. It's not happened to me, but it's happened to someone I read and admire. He's called Rainer Maria Rilke. Apparently, he spent some time in the Russian forests and came back having conversed or communicated with God. And the profit of that for us is that he wrote these weird but I think very powerful poems that he says that were directly communicated to him via God. I think poets do have visions, whether they admit it or not. And I think the idea of the poet as a kind of like mediator between the divine and the worldly, the sacred and the profane, is probably as prevalent now as it was in the Romantic times. And I guess in art in general, this idea of the genius, which still exists despite its many problems. And I mean, I'm not a huge believer in that, but I think it's a very prevalent thing. Or somehow poets, writers in general, in their moment of inspiration and composition, they've got this heightened aesthetic which borders on the mystical and perhaps also the divine. It does not happen to me, but yet, yes.
Maybe one day. Would be actually pretty cool. I always wanted to write, but I don't. And I'm waiting for this moment to happen, that someone, like, channels something great into me.
You have a vision, yeah. So you don't write?
I don't write. I used to like writing when I was way younger, like school essays and stuff, and I wanted to become a journalist, as I told you, but that just never happened.
Yeah. I mean, there were also experiments with, like, I guess, a lot of drugs, but like people writing this like automatic writing where they can't...
Virginia Woolf?
Not so much Virginia Woolf. I think she was actually, she's God. She's a goddess. But beat poets or even earlier, like French symbolists, like taking a lot of like substances and allowing themselves, their hand to like go wherever the substances or God or the spirit, you can use any of these words.
So is it the piece of advice that you are giving to me?
I am not giving this advice, no, definitely not. I think structure is good.
Yeah, and discipline, of course.
And discipline. I don't know, I don't think that writing creatively and writing, the kind of writing that I do, different enterprises. I find personal expression through academic writing, but I think they are two different forms. So I think poetry, literature in general is where people can go to like test out ideas and change the way we think about writing. Whereas what we do, what academic writers do, they try to be in conversation with other academic writers and maybe and hopefully other audiences as well, but they write in a sort of like very conventional form.
Right, so academic writing is technically you talking with other people who are writing about those things, right?
So you're stepping into, we go back to conversations again, you're stepping into a conversation, or you want to start a new conversation.
And social life, so to say, but in written form.
In written form, yeah, exactly. Which is the best. You just stay at home and just like write to people who either are dead or they probably are too established to read your own work. But you're hoping that like some other people will read it and that perhaps they will review it or they will use some of it in their own work and sort of like build on it.
And talk to you again. It's like this slow intellectual WhatsApp, pretty much.
Yes. Absolutely. There's definitely a lot of ghosting on this intellectual WhatsApp. There's also a lot of like conversing with ghosts. So, and also there's a lot of reading and rereading these WhatsApp messages to figure out what the sender meant. So yes, oh God, it sounds ridiculous. But yeah, I think that's a very good analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Christos, can you give us some life advice?
Well, since Rilke came up, there is this poem which is part of this letters to God or from God that he wrote. And there is one poem that I've turned to several times in my life. Moments when I felt low, I guess, or lost. And it's this line, he says, "No feeling is final," which I think is preceded by this other very powerful line that is, "Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror, keep going on, no feeling is final." And we find in literature various iterations of these thoughts, whether it's like Beckett in "I can't go on, I must go on, I will go on." But the way I read the "no feeling is final," which is something that I would offer as advice, as life advice, two things. The first is to know that in moments of trouble, that feeling will eventually go away, whatever it is. But also, and this is the second way into this line, that one must be adventurous, or that there is a lot of gain in one being adventurous. You have to trust that things will change and things will not go as planned, and that you need to have both beauty and terror. There is not a great determinism to life. Yes, one must plan things and be driven and goal oriented, but also not, and just take a more kind of laissez-faire approach to life. So the idea that no feeling is final, I think, also carries this thought that there's a lot to believe. There's a lot of life to believe. So I've often turned to Rilke for that lesson.
It sounds a little bit like against goal setting
Against
advice.
goal setting. Yeah, I mean, that's terrible advice, not to have goals or a plan, is it? But I think maybe you can have different goals, maybe even contradictory ones, and at different times work for different things.
Thank you.
Ksenia, we spoke earlier about writing and not writing. So I think that is something that has helped me, and that I often tell my students. And I steal this from a psychoanalyst and writer called Adam Phillips. He led a workshop, and the first thing I was lucky to be in this workshop, and the first thing he said is that everyone should feel free to speak and also not speak. And of course, when I teach, I almost bully my students into speaking because I think it's important to have a conversation. But increasingly, I also tell them that you should also feel free not to. I think one should write. There's so much to be gained from writing, whether it's journaling in the morning, or writing down some notes, or writing their thoughts and stories. But I think one should also not write when they don't want to. So assuming that everybody can write, because that's already an assumption, but for those of us who write, I think keep writing, but also when there isn't much to say, or when one wants to take a break, I think they should do so without any kind of guilt or feeling pressure. So do and don't. That is my writing advice.
Christos, and what's your take on writing on Instagram?
Writing on Instagram, I think if there's anything that can be expressed through emojis, one should keep it short. Don't mix the media and the forms. Instagram is for pictures and silly emojis.
All right. And then the advice for readers.
Read in translation. I mean, maybe you can connect to this because English is not your first language. English is not my first language, and I think the great thing about reading in a different language to yours is that you know that a lot will be lost. I still find it entertaining when somebody says, I read this book and I didn't understand it, as if it's a negative thing. I'm like, yeah, of course. I mean, why the pressure to understand everything, which is the same as I'm learning this language, but I'm not great at it. And I think I'm very comfortable with limitations, mostly because we have to live in a world where we don't use our mother language. And if you're from Cyprus, as I am a Greek Cypriot, even that is a bit complicated because it's always like we don't really have or we don't have a strong sense of a primary language. And I find that like reading books in translation opens the mind, opens the heart. You express, you find expressions of things that are a little bit foreign and strange, and I think that's quite appealing. But also, you go into a book with the knowledge that something will be lost and something of course will be gained. So read in translation is my advice, and also it's fine if you don't understand. Nobody fully understands the book anyway.
Yeah, thank you. So Christos, I asked you to recommend a couple of books for all of us to read, something that we absolutely should read.
Yeah, that was a very unfair and impossible question. So thank you for that, but I've had about 30 seconds to think, very long and hard. I chose one book of poems and one fiction. So for poetry, I chose Louis Gluck, the wonderful American contemporary writer. This book, Averno, and I didn't only choose it because they were the only copy of Gluck they had on the shelves. This is from 2006. I think poetry is about the word written, but also what is not written, what is not articulated, what cannot be articulated. So it's as much about what's on page as what's not on page, and Louis Gluck is a master of the spoken and also the unspoken. So not just Averno, but any of her books. I love The Wild Iris. But any of yours, you can find it online. Start with whatever happens to fall into your hands. And I think she's a marvelous poet that everyone should read, Louis Gluck.
Is she writing in English?
She's writing in English. Can we read?
We can read.
Can we read? Can we read? Yeah.
We should
this
read.
is how Averno. Averno is the mythical Roman place that the crater lake that was on the entrance to the ancient Roman underworld. And this is how it starts. This is called the night migrations. This is the moment when you see again the red berries of the mountain ash, and in the dark sky the birds' night migrations. It grieves me to think the dead won't see them. These things we depend on, they disappear. What will the soul do for solace then? I tell myself maybe it won't need these pleasures anymore. Maybe just not being is simply enough, hard as that is to imagine. Cheery stuff. Great. The other book that not just me, but I think millions of people out there have found a very transformative and just very delicious and unputdownable book is by Elena Ferrante, the Neapolitan tetralogy. This is the first one in the series. It's called My Brilliant Friends. I guarantee you that as soon as you finish this one, you will go running for the second one, the third one, and the fourth one. I was reading the second one in Italy, and I got into the book so much that I missed a train and got on the wrong train. And ended up in Pisa, and if you read this you'll understand why Pisa is important in the book. But I think this is a story of intense female friendship. It's a story about post-war Italy. It's a story about literature's capacity and ability to tell stories, and it's just. There is a term coined to describe the effect of reading Ferrante, which is Ferrante fever. So I think it's a good test to see if you will also catch the Ferrante fever. I definitely did catch it.
Thank you very much, Christos, for being with us here.
Thank you, Ksenia, for having me and for your patience.
And thank you for Soloneion Bookshop for having us also.
Thank you, Soloneion.